Hi, welcome to this field that I'm definitely not supposed to be walking on since I'm walking all over the crops, but you know, this is a nice background to record in front of, so who gives a shit? Today, I'd like to talk to you about Winger. Now, if you don't know who Winger are, they're a glam metal band from the 80s, but they're one that never really liked to stick to these stereotypical elements of glam metal or glam rock. They featured classically trained musicians, which isn't much like other rock bands. In fact, their singer and bass player, Kip Winger, had a background in ballet, which is about as classically trained as it gets. However, the self-proclaimed dream theater of glam metal might be more controversial than I thought they were to begin with. Now, I've always been quite a big fan of Winger, and I didn't know they were very hated until I started expressing my liking of Winger on the internet. Why are they hated? Now, before I give you a straight answer, let's take a detour into another very commonly hated rock band, Nickelback. A few years after Nickelback's inception, Brian Posehn, aka the big bearded guy from The Big Bang Theory, appeared on a Comedy Central talk show called Tough Crowd. Now, during his episode of that talk show, he took a cheap shot at Nickelback, which at the time confused the hosts of the show because Nickelback was still relatively new and unknown.
No one talks about the studies that show that bad music makes people violent. Like Nickelback makes me want to kill Nickelback.
Now, this joke could have easily completely gone under amongst the thousands of other bad jokes made on mainstream television during that time if Comedy Central hadn't chosen to use exactly that clip to advertise Tough Crowd to people over the course of like 6 months. Now, think about the effect that a TV commercial has on you. The entire point of a commercial is to have you memorize something. In fact, you've probably learned multiple television commercials by heart over the course of your life, as has, well, everybody. And if a commercial happens to indoctrinate you with the idea that Nickelback sucks every 30 minutes for as long as you keep Comedy Central on over the course of 6 months, well, that's bad news for Nickelback as a sort of new and unknown band. Especially once they'd had their big break, because thousands, tens of thousands of people had already formed completely uninformed opinions on their band based on nothing but a shitty throwaway joke from a TV show that happened to end up in a commercial. Don't underestimate the power of television and word of mouth, especially not in the early 2000s where television still had such a chokehold on society. But how does Winger relate? Well, you know Beavis and Butthead? If you do, yeah, I'm sure you do. And if not, well, you're not missing out. It's an unfunny adult cartoon from the 90s and 2000s, which features a lot of edgy commentary on rock and metal music. And at some point, the creators of Beavis and Butthead decided they didn't like Winger. Across multiple seasons, Beavis and Butthead continued to take jabs at Winger, beating up the geeky kid in the neighborhood for wearing Winger shirts, or making jokes like these.
Stuart wets his bed. Hey, Butthead, check it out. I'm going as a wuss. She's only 17. Woo!
Now remember what I said about television's ability to indoctrinate you with certain ways of thinking? Yeah. Now I'm not saying at all that the only way you could possibly dislike Nickelback and Winger is if you were brainwashed to do so by television. You are allowed to have your own opinions, and so am I, but you have to admit it's quite a coincidence, and also, more often than not, the hate for Nickelback is bandwagoning and perpetuated by people who've only ever heard, like, Photograph and How You Remind Me. A thing that I've learned quite the hard way on this channel is that people absolutely love Pantera and will not tolerate any, well, let's say slander. And, well, Pantera were great friends with Nickelback. In fact, after Dimebag's passing, Nickelback published the song Side of a Bullet using a few unreleased guitar tracks from Dimebag himself. Yet those kinds of metalheads, that category of music fans, are really the people you see shitting on bands like Nickelback the most, even though, you know, there was the fact that Pantera were fans of Nickelback and vice versa. But, you know, those kinds of metalheads were kind of the key audience for shows like Tough Crowd or, you know, MTV and Comedy Central back in those days in general. Another reason metalheads don't tend to like Winger is, you know, Metallica's jabs at them, such as, you know, Lars throwing darts at pictures of Kip Winger in the music video for Nothing Else Matters, which, you know, that's not really the kind of song that metalheads listen to, but it's a Metallica song, and they only apologized for doing that shit, like, what, 30 years later? But it's whatever. I think Kip Winger forgave them even after taking a few jabs back. I've always been quite the fan of Nickelback and Winger, and I was originally going to make separate videos on both, going into more detail on why people hate them and why those people are wrong. But once I'd noticed what those two bands had in common, especially as to why people hated them, I thought I'd make this video and focus more on the effect that television can have on music and on your mind, as opposed to why do people not like Nickelback's music because all the songs sound the same. There is no moral to this story. In fact, the script for this video ends right here. So I'm gonna have to come up with a conclusion off the cuff, and I guess the conclusion is Don't always listen to television, and if you want to hate a band, that's perfectly fine, but do it for good reason, and not because Bert from The Big Bang Theory told you to on television 25 years ago. Thank you for watching. I'm walking uphill now to distress my camera people. Thank you to my Patreon members. I'll put their names somewhere on screen. The big red ones are subscribed to the $10 or $11 tier. You can watch my most recent video somewhere up here. Also, the Patreon is in the description. Please subscribe. Also subscribe to the channel. My social media is probably somewhere. Peace out. However, the self-proclaimed dream theater of However, the classically... Scheiße, du Arschloch. Ich kann das nicht. Ich habe normal da einen Bildschirm, wo das draufsteht.